When I was a little girl, I played dress up on my grandmother's front porch, and my cousin and I performed for each other. And I got to dance when I was 3 years old and 4 years old, and we put on a lot of dress up, high heel clothes, and played and sang and danced, and then my cousin and I clapped for each other. So those were the dream days that someday I might grow up and I might get to dance again. So here I am at my age, uh, living lots of wonderful memories and having a good time today, but working. I grew up in Oak Cliff, Dallas, and I can remember many wonderful things of riding the streetcar across the viaduct, going to downtown Dallas. We used to do that frequently because even though I lived with my grandmother much of my time, my mother worked all the time, and she worked at Fishburne's. That was a very famous dry cleaners, and so my daddy went off to Alaska to seek his fortune. Those were early days, and I finally refused when they moved around. I wasn't leaving anymore, so I just moved in with my grandma. Their name was Reagan, Claude Reagan, and they were original settlers of the Dallas area, and very nice people. My grandfather was a realtor, and he owned a lot of rent houses. And he'd drive a Model T even when other people were in fancy cars. But he drove his little Model T, and I'd ride with him to go pick up rent from all the renters. My grandmother was named Eulalia. They called her Eudy. I laugh a lot of times when I think it wasn't really very wise to name my children after both grandmothers, because one would have been named Eudy or Eulalia, and the other one would have been Maud. So, and then they named my mother Myrtle. So those weren't really good names to name your children in the 50s. I have one sister, and her name is Linda, and she married. Her name is, instead of McDonough, her name is Hamilton, and she lives here in Hurst. Back then, my parents just were not wealthy. They didn't have any money to send me to college. So I knew that I was going to have to make my own money. So my skills were good because in high school I learned typing and shorthand, and I was good at those two things. So my mother got me a job at Dun and Bradstreet. So I worked at 16 and 17 in the summers, and then I graduated early in January, so I worked 7 months to save all of that money. So that was enough money for my first year at Baylor. I did graduate out of a class of 500, number 4. So I guess I should have tried a little harder because 4 doesn't get you scholarships. We were taught to respect our teachers. We were taught to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you. And yes, give me that assignment and I'll go home and work on it. I met Herman the 7 months I was working to save my money to go to Baylor. And I met him, and he was late for his first date. He drove up, and I was mad because I thought, oh. And then he drove up in a 46 Ford, and I thought, that's a nice car. And so we got in, and what I didn't know is he had 3 jobs to make his car payments. But anyway, I sort of got over my madness, and then we dated for 7 months, and in the end, before I went to Baylor, he said, well, we just need to get married. And I said, no, I'm going to Baylor. So after the first year, he just swept me off my feet. We carved our names on a tree at Rivershawn Park, and so I had enough money left over to pay for our wedding because, as I said, my parents had not prepared for any of that. And so I had enough money to have 5 bridesmaids and a nice wedding at Cliff Temple, and those were the days where we just had punch and cookies in the fellowship hall. Things were different then. When Herman and I married, we moved to Fort Worth, and because he was working at the time out at the old Convair, he was in the Naval Air Reserve, and we lived off of 8th Street in close to downtown Fort Worth, and I rode the bus out and interviewed at Houston Fire and Casualty and made money. I was just real surprised that I used those high school and college skills and I got a job. That was in 1950. The transportation was good because I could just ride to my job, and also on weekends we'd take the bus downtown Fort Worth and we'd go to Leonard's and Everybody's, and we also could go to the theater. That was fun. After 3 months alone, I drove, and I had only had a driver's license for a month, and I drove with one other person in the front seat that couldn't drive all the way to San Diego to see Herman and to make our new residence there in a rented little duplex that we had for $85 a month. So it was fun. And I loved Herman. We were married 44 years from being 19 and 20. And when I drove to California, he was called back in the service. I put all of our earthly belongings in the back seat in that car. Herman would go back to Convair, and I'd get a job. So we settled in White Settlement, which was out there by the Convair. We saved enough money to build our first little house in Richland Hills. And it's interesting when I say that because my closet is larger today, but that little house was 1,100 square feet, and it was right around the corner from Richland Hills Baptist Church. And so I might say I had told Herman, he had previously been Methodist, and I had said, now you will, he agreed to this before we married, that I'm stronger in my faith than you are, you have to join the Baptist Church. So he said he would. And so we built that little 1,100 square foot house. But let me tell you what he did. He went out and got a real estate license because he knew that he could make some commissions. And so the commissions helped us. So we had enough money to buy the lot. That was $1,000. And we built that little 1,150 square foot home with absolutely no furniture. I worked at Convair, and I felt so important because they gave me a secret card, and that meant I could just go anywhere. And so Herman and I would meet out on the line. We were building B-58s at the time. They've long been in mothballs now, which really tells history, but Herman started with this real estate, and he started selling houses out on the line out at Bell. And he would give people $50 for referrals. And so he did well. And so we just piled up the money till we could have a washer and dryer. And before long, now Herman built this before he met John, he built a little real estate office, saved the money, and he used to go down there and sit, and wait for customers to come by so he could sell them. Herman was always out making deals. Always. He told John, he said, John, go down there and get your real estate license because you don't even have to take a test. Those were the days where it was very, very easy to get a real estate license. Herman later even taught at the technical college, and that was one of his favorite things, was to teach others to be realtors. Oh, I was so excited because our home in Hurst was 1132 Hurstview Drive. I drove by there this morning as I was coming. I thought, I just want to take a glance at that house. But we had a sunken living room, which, it just made it so glamorous looking. So we had all kinds of events. When Jim Wright was running again, we had a big party for him. And I remember I had bought a piano from one of our tile men who did all of our tile work. And so we had the piano playing, and Jim Wright and his first wife were there. And when he visited our church, I always loved Jim because he'd just go straight to the choir and sing with our choir. And you wouldn't find many big politicians who'd get up in your choir and sing, but he did. Herman didn't like to borrow money, but we did get a loan, but our house payment was $85 a month. It was the new place to be. I mean, it was the in place. Pipeline was the main road, other than Highway 10, the old Highway 10. We didn't have the freeway then. And so it was, Bedford Euless Road was a dirt road. That was quite interesting. We were real thrilled when we got one of the best restaurants was CA's restaurant. CA was, I remember when he was a Hallmark card salesman and a great young entrepreneur. We loved CA. And when we had that A-framed building down there, and he opened up the first really good restaurant we had in Hurst. It was wonderful. If you wanted chicken fried steak, it was fabulous. But we ate there on Sundays. He had great cooks, the best homemade rolls you could ever get. And he did like sort of home cooking type stuff. We had a bowling alley and some of the things like, you see today. And Bill Souter was the postmaster. And so I'd get to say hello to Bill every day when I'd come by. And we had the Shady Oats Cleaners, and we had a beauty shop there, and you just made friends wherever you went. I mean, it was easy to make friends. And then another business that I didn't mention, we used to have a Gibson store. And at one time we owned 5 Gibson stores because Herman was the type that he was. A doctor friend of mine classed him always in a mode of acquisition, always. But those who've lived in Hurst a long time know what our Gibson store used to be, and it was the first discount thing that we used to have, which was great, to be able to save money. All of us wanted to save money. And by the way, I might mention, we didn't have doctors out here. We had maybe 1 or 2, but we didn't have pediatricians. We didn't have specialty doctors. And I remember when we first got the HEB hospital, that was wonderful. But I used to drive across town all the time to take them to the pediatricians and to the pediodontist and the special doctors that they needed or that I needed. We didn't have any gynecologists or anything out here. We had the home builders meeting down in the old Texas Hotel. And we knew that JFK was coming to town before he went to Dallas, and he would be spending the night. I'll never forget when they both walked in. Jackie was walking behind him. She had on a beautiful black cut velvet dress that I thought, actually it was a suit, and she did walk in so glamorous. Oh. But then when I saw him, he looked so charismatic. I said, "Mr. President," and he walked right over and shook my hand. And I was so impressed. I wasn't that strong with them before, but when he shook my hand, he looked me in the eye, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the next morning. Herman and I were both home, and our little girl came in and said, "Daddy, the president's been shot," because she had a TV in her room. And we were shocked. We both jumped up and just couldn't believe it. But we were developing that area, so that's the reason we sold lots to all the people on our street. We had enough money then that we were developing, and Herman already had the partner with John by then. They became good friends. Like I say, I really met them in church, John and Jean. And so when Herman said, "Well, I think John has some money," he went to A&M, and he'd have some money to put in it, and we could start buying land and build houses. And so I said, "Well, what are you going to name this company?" And he said, "Well, my idea, we can call it Smith Barfield." So I said, "Okay." So when we first started building houses, I have quite a flair for liking bright colors and jewel colors and so forth. So I was the decorator. So I had come from business skills to being a decorator. And that was fun because those were the days when we used a lot of wallpaper. So I'd use great big flowers in the kitchen or hanging bird cages or whatever. And I'd choose the brick, and they were always calling me, "Patsy, you're behind. We need brick today, and you haven't picked it." But I'd run up to the office, and one of their first offices was just this old house they had up on Bedford Road, and they actually had enough money they could hire a lady to sit there while they were out doing things and trying to get approvals and so forth from councils. And then Herman decided he would just run for councilman, and that was a big deal. He said the secret to get elected, Patsy, is to get the voters list, and we call everybody. And so we called. We worked so hard to get him elected. And the Davises were a big influence because he had previously served as councilman and mayor. So they told us, you remind those people to get out to vote, because they may say, yeah, they support you, but on the last day they don't show up and vote. And so we looked at the lists and we called people, and it was a real effort. Oh, it was. But Herman was the type, he was very friendly, and people could see he was just a little country boy out there that would shake your head, and he could relate to the rich and the poor. He really had that ability. And we had this other friend, Don Davis. He was also a councilman and mayor, and they became our good friends. We did a lot of things together. We went down to Austin when John Connally became governor. That's a long time ago. But we had a lot of activities. I belonged to the Hearst Study Club. That was fun. And I can remember that we had Bush Sr., when he was running for senator, came to our Hearst Study Club to speak. And he was just an ordinary type guy, but highly educated and very impressive. We were very active. Herman was active in the Kiwanis Club. He actually was president at one year, and then he joined the chamber, the HEB chamber. He was president of that. We did everything. I mean, we went to every little ribbon cutting. We went to when Herman would go to council meetings, sometimes I'd go and sit out and listen and go with him. And some of those council meetings would last way into the night. But Herman had a silver tongue. I wondered how he took the Norman Vincent Peale course, and that was invaluable to him. Oh, he loved it. And he was later known as he could speak, and he could sell the council some of his developments. He cultivated friendships and councilmen and people, and you could meet him and he would make you feel good. He loved people in a country sort of way, corn pone. Herman was he was on the board that did the airport, and he was on the board that had to try to get Dallas and Fort Worth to go together. He said it only makes sense that we have this. So we went to the opening for the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. How fun that was. Oh, that was fun. And we had wonderful 4th of July parades. And I wanted to tell about that because our daughters could ride in the parade with us. And that was so fun, waving. And I'll never forget how embarrassed they were. They didn't want to sit in the back seat and wave. And I'd have to watch them. They'd try to lay down in the back seat so they didn't have to see people or let people know. Hearst was really the up-and-coming neighborhood. Living in Richland Hills, and when our friends saw, oh, you're moving to Hearst? Oh. And then, that really sounded like a big deal. We built 3 houses. John had money to put in, and we built some houses in Richland Hills first. And then we moved on to Hearst, and we developed a lot of the Shady Oaks area. Herman bought property, I was just thinking about that, from Ed Baker, and the Baker Brothers nursery was part of the land that we developed. And so naturally, having grown plants, it was wonderful soil. And so we had no excuse not to have pretty yards. Houses didn't cost that much back then. For $15,000, you could get a really nice home. $15,000. And the way we used to build the homes is we didn't they weren't all brick. A lot of times we'd have wainscoting, and you might build 3 sides brick and do the back in lumber. And another thing is we made friends with the longtime lumber people in town. I'm trying to think what their name was. Uh, but they had a lumber yard up on the old Highway 10. And so when we first started building, they would subsidize and help us as long as we bought the lumber. But we paid 10 prices for the lumber, and but even so, prices were good back then. As Herman built a lot of houses and I assisted in the decorating, Herman decided, he was the guy that was always moving forward. And so he told John, he said, John, I think I'd really like to do more development and I'd like to do some commercial things. And John said, well, you're crazy. You don't want to branch out to that. He said, yeah. He said, I think we ought to have a Safeway store here in Hurst. And at the time, there was no development north of Pipeline. I mean, we had the homes, but it all stopped at the Bedford-Euless Road. And so Herman told me that he said, I'm going to go over there and talk to those Safeway people and see if I can talk them into building a Safeway. And actually on Bedford-Euless Road, Herman knew just where it ought to be. And so I said, they'll look at you crazy when you walk in. And he said, I'm going. So he was the guy that loved to wear his suits and loved to get all dressed up. And so he walked in. He was told later by the councilman that he could sell snowballs to Eskimos. But anyway, they agreed to go along with him. But they said, we don't have any houses north. But they agreed. He told them, convinced them. He said, we've got a population growth. They're going. So he actually opened up the first Safeway store, and later then built 22 Safeway stores. And he did tilt wall, and that was a new type thing that they weren't doing often. And so he found superintendents that knew how to build tilt walls. And so he branched in the commercial, and John stayed with doing homes and some development on his own too. They were great friends and never had a crossword. Greatest respect for each other. There were times when they thought, well, we're going out on a limb to buy this hunk of property, but Herman did it anyway. And where our third home was actually on Norwood Drive and 2510 Norwood. And so we were the only house on a hill with 100 acres surrounding us. And I'll never forget, he bought both sides of the highway for $1,000 an acre. And this land was part of the old Spanish land grant. The house is still there, and the side of it is Chisholm Park in the back. And we kept like 10 acres. Mayfair Shopping Center, that was the big one. And actually, we were very fortunate. Herman sold that in the 80s to Herb Wiseman, who's a big, and we got out just in time before the big fall again. So that was really our big beginning. That was where the other 100 acres was. And Herman was saving that. He could dream that that was going to be a big commercial. He said, that's going to be the new main road. We did a subdivision called Wintergreen Acres, so we did have some development across over there. But on the frontage of Grapevine Highway was this new big shopping center, and it was the nicest big shopping center. And Herman was working really hard to get it all filled up. That's when Herman was building Safeway stores, and so we had our party at the big house, and I had everybody wear black armbands, and I had his cake. I thought that was so clever, built like a Safeway store. And all we had to do is do chocolate and crushed pecans all over, and it looked just like the Safeway store. And that Safeway store, there's still one, and there's one in Hurst, one in North Richland Hills, and they multiplied rapidly. I think lots of us miss the old Safeway stores and Piggly Wiggly stores. We didn't have a Piggly Wiggly, but we had that Safeway store. When we later moved into Colleyville, Herman started developing all around. We did several subdivisions in Colleyville. Herman's dream, since we were active in the Builders Association, was to become president of the Builders Association. I'll never forget that. And he asked me what I thought, and that meant you were going to have to spend a lot of time. And that's a 5-year program when you commit to that. So we were doing well financially, and Herman said, well, I can just put the building aside for a while and do development. And I have a superintendent and I have a man in charge, and I can do that remote. And if I have to fly back and forth to Washington, we can do it. And he said, looked at me and he says, this is when our children both were in college. So it was a good time. So he met lots of people in Washington, D.C., and he testified in Congress on housing. I have this big picture of Herman testifying to Ronald Reagan in the cabinet room, and very interesting. But he was asked during that time to serve on the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. So he was in charge of 5 states. He was Jay Janis's, Jimmy Carter's appointment. So he and the headquarters of the 9th District were in Little Rock. So we had to go to Little Rock for those meetings with those 5 states. But that was a real opportunity. I'll never forget, in 1981, we had 21% interest. Can you imagine 21% interest? And that just happened to be the year that Herman was president of the Builders Association. We had builders all over the country committing suicide. It was terrible. And I didn't mention, Herman also got into banking. We also owned 5 banks at one time. It's amazing how a little country boy from Greenville, Texas, could be such a dreamer and accomplish so much. Herman and I had wonderful opportunities. We were invited to the White House several times. And when Carter was there, we were close to Carter. And also, I might tell you that Herman got to be on the finance committee for the Democratic Party. So we went to several of the meetings, and that was an interesting thing, too. We loved politics. Herman loved it, and it just gets in your blood. But as I look back on his accomplishments, I'm just amazed at what all he did accomplish. Amazing. I will say he was a faithful servant, and he gave God the credit. And we always tithed. We started tithing in our very early years when we didn't really have any money, but we learned early that you can't outgive God. So in our church in Richland Hills, we always tithed and tried to give a little more. But those opportunities were there, and Herman would say over and over, you've got to cash in on your opportunities when they're there. And he was the type, he could wear his little navy blue pinstripe suits and walk in a bank and wave and call them by name, and he'd come out with $1 million loan. God has truly protected me, and that'll be 23 years ago that he suddenly passed away of a heart attack. He was 64 years old, and we just got him to the hospital, but I think he was already gone. They say he actually blew the bundle, which is the main aorta, and there was no way to save him. When Herman passed away, I knew that I felt like I have to take over and continue our legacy and not have debt and pay off the bills. And so it took 2 years to do it, but now primarily we do investments. But I have 2 CPAs who work for me and also a receptionist. So there are 4 of us in our office. When he moved to Colleyville, and the subdivision I live in now, 94 lots, and actually so interesting because Herman saved 2 lots for us so we could build our home there. So I still lived there 5 years before Herman's death, and it'll be 23 this August since his passing. I'm a trustee at Dallas Baptist. I'm on the National Executive Board for the Builders Association. I'm active in my church. I do some speaking. I'm asked to give sometimes little talks on what it's like for women to be in business. And I love serving on boards that count. And I did establish my foundation so I can do my gifting through that. And so I travel quite a bit just to make all the board meetings. And also, I'm on the National Endowment, and we get to do scholarships. And I set up a scholarship in Herman's name out of Washington, D.C. And then we have one out of the state of Texas, the Builders Association. So, and then I have one through my own personal. So we continue to do that, which I'm very blessed. I'm very fortunate. I have the two daughters, and my oldest daughter, Vicki, married Dr. Steve Weinberg, who was a local surgeon, and later she put him through law school. So he was fortunate that he had both careers, and after being a surgeon for many years, he became an attorney. He's now semi-retired, but they live in Colleyville. Vicki has one son. He graduated from Wake Forest, and she raised two stepchildren. Both of the stepchildren that Vicki raised turned out exceptional. They all have masters, doctors going up. I mean, they've done extremely well. And then my other daughter, Carla, married, had three children, and her children are two are married. They both have done very well. One lives in New Orleans and one lives in Missouri, and she teaches school at the Vale Christian Academy. I will say that Hearst had leadership that was outstanding, and through the years, those that Johnson that followed Herman and C.A. Sanford and the previous leadership were for pro-growth. Hearst is made up of a lot of people. It's not so exclusive that we have for the real workers. We have people who work in Hearst that worked in Bell Helicopter, worked at the airport, people who care, a loving spirit, a very loving togetherness type. I love the people of Hearst, and what's so interesting is how I can come back to this senior center where you're filming this today and feel so at home. I loved Hearst. We lived in Hearst for like 25 years before we moved to Colleyville, and Herman loved Hearst. I'd say our real beginnings, even though we lived in Richland Hills prior, this was moving where the growth was. We've been fortunate in Hearst to have for the real people, restaurants, churches, schools, and wonderful surrounding opportunities for work. We're glad that we had the opportunity to have those ground roots in Hearst, Texas, because it was wonderful, just wonderful.